Very glad to be with you. Excited about this topic which Dave proposed to me. I thought it was a great idea. We're going to use this last 45 minutes with you to appeal to you, to use your incredible talents beyond some of what we've been talking about today. A lot of what we talked about today were the challenges and opportunities facing our businesses. Today we're going to go beyond that and talk about the world around us. So our theme is the world needs us, needs public relations even more than our clients do. Now, Dave and I are friends, but we're also competitors. But we're going to set aside the pitched, fierce battle between Ketchum and Fleischman for just this period of time to talk to you about something much more important. And I'm very excited about it. I'm an optimist, but I think you'd agree the world is kind of a mess. We got political unrest, social unrest, income inequality, massive youth unemployment, gender inequality, terrorism, giant intractable healthcare issues across the world, and many other issues, including the refugee crisis going on right here. And you know that we have skills in bridge building and in facilitating dialogue. But beyond those abstract notions of the value we can bring, we've been giving some thought to some more specific macro dynamics that have changed the world we live in from just a few years ago, and some specific global problem areas in which your talents might be just what the world needs now. So it's meant to kind of rally you, give you a call to action, but also make sure these things are very much on your radar. And Dave has been doing something about those kind of macro dynamics that are pretty compelling right now and that weren't really present just a few years ago. So Dave, turn things to you.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to address just three phenomena that are present in today's world and underscoring why the world needs us more than ever. January 7th of this year, what happened? January 7th was a day that changed the social dialogue across the globe. Two well-armed gunmen entered the offices of the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, taking revenge for publication of images of the Prophet Muhammad. When it was all done, a dozen people were killed, including the gunman, and within hours on the streets of Paris, there were people wearing T-shirts that said, "Je suis Charlie," I am Charlie. Now, I'm not here to talk about religion per se, or politics. I am really here to talk about culture as a driving context for all communications and whether we and our clients fully appreciate the impact of culture today. And I'll delve into why this terminology, je suis Charlie, is so important. Because within just a few hours, on the streets of Algiers was the anti-slogan, "We are Muhammad." I am Charlie, we are Muhammad. Now, if you think about the cultural underpinnings of those statements, you might want to spend a little time reading a really provocative writer out of Algiers named Kamal Daoud. Has anyone ever heard of Kamal Daoud? Brilliant. And he has examined these two phenomena, these two appearances of this language in this way. In France, the validity of the individual is paramount. Individual ideas, individual values, individual expressions are all central to society. The individual is celebrated. That is why he says the message on the shirts begin with the pronoun I. But in the streets of Algiers, he goes on to say, it is a culture that is collectivist and unanimous. The individual doesn't exist as such, Only the collective exists. This is why we are Muhammad is such a telling use of the pronoun we in the context like this. Now, I'm not making a value judgment of claims or cultures. The point is there is a difference. And we have to be the social anthropologists to understand what is driving these differences. Culture as context. Think about it. In satire, nothing is sacred. In religion, everything is sacred. The question is, how do we bridge this divide? The number one rule of communications today is to be understood. How can you be understood when there is this kind of gap between beliefs and cultures? Now, put yourself in the boardroom with your client who is going to ask you to do a multi-country, multicultural campaign around the same product, service, or idea. Will you be armed enough to understand the nuance of each culture, and even within each culture, the microcultures within those cultures? Now, it's very difficult to bridge these divides. And that leads me to the second phenomenon that feeds right into this. And that is the growing radicalization of dialogue. We talk about radical this and radical that, but what if the radicals are us? You know, it's a zero-sum world. It's a winner-take-all world. You either agree with me or you disagree. You're either for me or you're against me. There is no middle ground, it seems, anymore. In fact, the issue or the concept of compromise is ridiculed and vilified because for some reason you're heroic if you keep your stand on the right or the left. And do you know who will criticize you the most? Do you know who will attack you the most? It's not your opposition. It's people in your own party, on your own side, that you gave this much. So what's driving this? I think it relates to two or three other phenomena. One is the politicization of everything, which is driven by the endless political campaign cycles of the world we live in today. What does a politician need to do first? They need to appeal to their base. If you stray from your base, then you risk alienation from your own party. So, how do politicians communicate? The same way that we communicate. They are using every channel available. And let's just talk about the news for a minute. What comprises news today? What is the definition of news? It's controversy or it's change, right? And even more so today, it's what is sensational. So in order for politicians to differentiate themselves, they must break through the clutter. They must say something so strident and so exceptional, because news is about the exception, that they get noticed and they get the coverage. And then all of that radical viewpoint, that far right or far left, that uncompromising view with no middle, what happens? It's all amplified over and over and over again. And then what you find is that you have all this opinion chasing very few facts, right? Haven't we seen that? You've got all this airtime, all this space, all this opinion chasing a minuscule amount of fact. And that is amplified. Now, we as a society are emulating this pattern. It is an either-or proposition. Either you're for me or against me, but where is progress going to be found? It's got to be found in the middle. And we are the ones who can broker that coming together. This is why the world needs what we do. Maybe not directly for a client, but maybe in your grocery stores, or in your clubs, or in your social meetings elsewhere, maybe your places of worship. We really need to be the brokers of this understanding. Remember, the first rule of communications is to be understood. But think about it, if we have radicalization of dialogue, then you have to come from a place of understanding. You have to come from an open mind, which brings me to the third phenomenon, which I am referring to as intellectual isolationism. Intellectual isolationism. In the year 1900, about 95% of the population, whether you were in a rural area or an urban area, about 95% of the population never left their homes within 5 miles. They lived their entire lives within 5 miles of their home. If you were in a village, you were probably born in your farmhouse. You worked the fields around your house. You took your product to market, just into the village. Maybe you went to religious ceremonies at the village church. And you were probably buried on the farm as well. And during that time, when people would come into your village, you would either accept them or you would reject them. And you would view them first with a lot of skepticism until they earned their right to stay. Same thing in the cities, because people didn't have mass transit. They had to live very close to their place of work, right? So today, have we really changed that much? In spite of all the mobility, and I'm sure we have 100 different cities represented at ICCO today. In spite of all this mobility, let me ask you this. How many people go to the internet today to change their minds? I'm not talking about shopping for a big screen TV or looking for the best deal on the latest iPhone. I'm asking how many people go to another site to hear what the opposition has to say. The fact is, we don't go to the internet for a second opinion. We go for validation. We seek our comfort zone. And if you dare stray, even if you had the bravery to go to another opposition site and voice your opinion, what would happen? Well, remember the wisdom of crowds? Remember the self-policing of websites that we all relied on? This sounds like the village police to me, because they will drive you right out of there. They will ostracize you. They will find you. They will try to embarrass you. And by the way, all of these tactics are being used today, and I really found what Brad had to say very, very much connected to this. That the drivers of change today, the drivers of opinion today, are multivariate, they're highly sophisticated, and they're using a lot of these tactics. So how do you break through intellectual isolationism? Well, we now know how people consume media. We have the analytics. David Rockland knows this very well. We have the analytics. I can find out where David Gallagher shows up. I won't tell them everything, David. But I will find out how David consumes media. And it will be up to me not to put a target on his back, but put a target on my back. So I will show up in places where David can discover me in ways that are relevant and personal and timely and useful and credible. This is why the world needs us. Not just to promote the next product or service, But it needs us to help break through this intellectual isolationism, to find the middle ground in the radicalization of dialogue, to not only understand cultural nuance, but bring together both cultures, all cultures, in some form of understanding. Rob, over to you.
All right. Well, all three of those make a compelling and challenging backdrop. Culture is context, the radicalization of dialogue, and intellectual isolationism is the world in which we live in now. So in addition to hopefully doing something about those dynamics themselves, let's take a look at three areas in which we'd have to deal with the issues in these areas, but with that as backdrop. How many of you work in healthcare or have in your careers? All right, then you know there are just huge, huge challenges here. And by global health, I'm referring to infectious diseases, the spread of them, the behavior that leads to the spread of them, but also the response in whatever form that it takes. But also the chronic illnesses, the so-called lifestyle illnesses that used to be called rich economy illnesses, and now through globalization, we've managed to bring them all to the developed and low-income world too. So diabetes and obesity, hypertension, mental health, cancer. The greatest obstacles to addressing those giant health issues are not the fact that we don't have enough scientific breakthroughs or we don't have enough money. From our experience, the greatest obstacles are two things: short-termism and inertia, or the lack of behavior change among consumers. Short-termism in the form of politicians who have to get reelected in 2 to 4 years. What politician is going to be interested in a solution to a giant health problem that takes 5 to 10 years to execute? Every good solution to a major health problem takes more than 2 years. And we also have to look at ourselves in the mirror. Business has short-termism. We're all focused on the next quarterly results. We're focused on our tenure as the leader of our company. If it's a 5 to 10 year horizon to solve one of these problems, most CEOs know their tenure isn't going to last that long. And they're mostly focused on the quarterly results. And it really is a giant problem that we can help with. Dave and I are fortunate to be strategic partners with the World Economic Forum. We get to go to Davos every year. You'd be amazed at how much they flock to us, to you, to the people in our discipline, to help them with this. As it turns out, ministers of health and CEOs of companies are not natural facilitators of dialogue. They're horrible at it. They're used to sitting in a room in which they're the boss and everyone takes direction from them. They marvel at the fact that we can get up and facilitate a discussion between Margaret Chan over at the World Health Organization and 10, 15, 20 CEOs over here. Break down the adversarial relationship. For some reason, WHO regards business as a serious adversary. And business looks at them as kind of policing and looking out for them. That needs to change. The only solutions to this are public-private partnerships. At a time, you've heard the statistic, of the 100 GDPs in the world, 50 are companies and 50 are states. When companies represent 50 of the largest economies in the world, not nations, companies have to have a central role in this discussion. And we as advisors to management have to help get them there. The other thing they're fascinated with when we have these discussions at the UN or wherever it is they're fascinated by the fact that we do social marketing. They say, you know, we need some of that marketing that you do for some of your big brands. We need to get people to embrace new behaviors, urban design, riding bicycles in cities, buying products that are better for them. And they really need our help in doing that. It is called social marketing. It's what we do for a living. It's a giant opportunity. The world really needs us. And here's an example, not a client of either of our firm, Bell Canada. If you haven't seen this, look it up. It's called Let's Talk. For the last 5 years, their CEO has a vested interest in mental health because it's affected his family, dedicated their entire social responsibility work internally and externally to the issue of mental health. They have alliances within the company for people with mental health. Think about that. There are a lot of alliances within companies for underrepresented populations, et cetera. Do you have one at your company for mental health issues? No, because it's too stigmatized. When someone goes out on a mental health leave, it's the one leave we don't talk about. They have all that inside the company, but they've also dedicated their Olympic athletes that they sign up to promote the company to PSA campaigns encouraging everyone to talk more openly about mental health. This is what we do for a living, and the world needs us now more than ever. Huge issue that I feel very, very passionately about, that is obviously ever present here in Italy. Huge youth unemployment, a lost generation of people between the age of 18 and 25, and now it's slipping even older than that. Huge problem, but income inequality in all of its forms. Now, you may think that this is a problem for government. It's a public sector problem, and the politicians are all talking about it. Big campaign issue. It's a problem for us. It's a problem for the private sector, for companies. This is yet another example, as Brad said earlier, where corporations now are being looked to address the biggest problems in our lives. And if you think this is going to miss your company, think again. It's not just going to affect the big companies like McDonald's that have to worry about minimum wage. If you're a luxury brand, it's going to come to your door. If you're a travel brand, it's going to come to your door. If you're a healthcare brand, it's going to come to your door. And I'm talking physically. Protests on your CEO's front lawn and in front of your corporate headquarters because of this issue. It's going to end in one of two ways if we don't do something about it. Massive social unrest and or regulation in the form of extremely high forms of taxation for anyone making any kind of a living. So we have to be, as advisors to management, warning and telling the executive committees of our companies that they need to place this high on their register. We had a meeting like this of senior communications leaders in the States just last week. 90% of them said they're not discussing this issue at the company. Only 10% were discussing it. That has to change. The solutions are pay people more, work with public-private partnerships to create more jobs, particularly around the infrastructure that's collapsing in Western Europe and North America, and education, which is no longer just a public sector issue. We need to get the schools better. It's a company and corporate and brand issue to fix education, to retrain people for the future. The world needs us more than ever. And here, lastly, this area, the refugee crisis, which people here in Italy know more about than we do. But we've been watching this very, very closely and have quite a bit of involvement in it. We're watching one of the largest human migrations in history. It's actually the fourth largest migration in human history. Now topping 6 million Syrian refugees coming into Turkey and Lebanon and Jordan, about 4.6 million there, 1.4 million coming into Europe. And, you know, obviously it's creating a no-win situation for European politicians. If they don't let them in, they're not a humanitarian living up to the ideals of their company. If they do let them in, their popularity drops like a rock because they feel very threatened in those countries. Also, we see now this kind of proxy war going on between Russia and Iran and Syria and NATO and the United States. Very dangerous situation. But beyond the military and the political side of this, the message for you is it's a humanitarian crisis. And maybe even a humanitarian crisis is too sterile a word. It's about lives and death and ruined lives, millions of them. And we can play a role in helping to tell that story. We're storytellers. Either we tell the story or we help facilitate the story. In this case, just help facilitate the story. Help people know that these are human beings. And we studied this kind of a crisis when we were growing up during World War II. It's happening right now in our generation. The biggest humanitarian crisis of our lives is happening right now, and we can play a role. Let me tell you this story. This is Muhammad and his family. It's a family of 10. A few of the kids are missing here. 2 twin 16-year-old girls, a 5-year-old girl in the center there, and 5 boys, 2 of which are in the photograph. Back in 2012, when the Syrian war came to their town of Daraa in southern Syria, right by the Jordanian border, Muhammad joined the Free Syrian Army because he saw what the Syrian army was doing to harass and abuse people. His house was targeted as a result, hit with 12 rocket shells. They actually got out. The little girl in the front, riddled with shrapnel, almost lost both of her legs. They get out on the street, and their 2.5-year-old daughter is shot in the arms of her mother. They spend the next 3 weeks taking bus rides and walking to Jordan, the closest country, to get out of the country. And they end up spending time in King Abdullah Park and the little girl still hasn't gotten proper medical attention. For a month, she's hospitalized. After that, again, almost loses her legs, and now she's back up on her feet and healthy. But they brought jewelry with them and money and only the clothes on their back. They had to spend all the jewelry, all the money in order to survive. They're now flat broke, have no money, 130 JD per month to live in 2 tiny rooms with the 10 of them in Amman, which is where they are now. Muhammad wants to go back. He's a very religious man. He wants to die on Syrian soil. He doesn't want to be in Jordan. The mythology around refugees come to your country and take your jobs and live off of your social system. In this case, all he wants to do is go back. He put his kids into Jordanian schools. They were beaten because they are the discriminated refugees. He had to take them out of school. As he says, the future of his children is over if he has to stay in Jordan. These are human stories. We happen to know this one because we represent the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees for the last 3 years, and we've had teams of our people in the refugee camps, not bringing the foreign correspondents that are already there, but doing what we do so well for a living. We looked at the media and we looked for everyone other than the great foreign correspondent that's going to win a Pulitzer. So we have Marie Claire there, we have Grazie magazine from here, we have the breakfast journalists from the UK, the morning show journalists from the United States, hearing stories like this to make it something very real and make it meaningful to us and everyone else in our population and not some abstract threat. So as we said, we think the world needs us more now than ever, and there's a huge role for us to play. So whether it's the macro dynamics that you see here, or the areas of health inequality, the refugee crisis, I hope it stimulates a little bit of your thinking about the role that your amazing talent is what's needed right now in the world. Bridge building, opening dialogue, leading the media to the story, helping to tell the story, and solving big intractable problems with the skills that we have. So we are about 6 minutes from breaking up and heading to a great event, but we do have a microphone here, and we'd love to get a few comments, and then we can certainly continue them over cocktails, but on any one of those issues. One right there.
Yeah, okay, fine. So one of the things you said, sorry, Blair from Ogilvy here, hello. One of the things you said was about social media landscape being an environment where people go and seek to reaffirm their existing presuppositions or existing ideas. But it strikes me that that's not really much of a change in reality. People have always done that in terms of the media they consume in general. People don't normally pick up a different newspaper or walk down the street and find a different trade publication and things like that. So in terms of the psychological way in which we treat people, is that more of the issue? And it's almost a platform becomes slightly, and not an irrelevant side, but our understanding needs to be more psychologically based versus a greater understanding of how social media as a channel has worked.
Could you expound on the psychology-based comment?
Only in terms of, I suppose, myself in terms of the times when people have spoken to me with regards to shifting perception and helping people move and change the way they interact with the world is always explained, and we've always spoken about this quite often in the PR world, of that you've got people on two sides of a fence. When they are a long way in one side of the fence, they're the people who you're going to it's going to be almost impossible to change their mind. They're self-reaffirming. They're continuously going to reaffirm their opinions, as you were mentioning in terms of social media landscape, providing an easy route of access to that. But it's the people in the middle who are more easy perhaps to shift and slightly nudge one way or the other, and then there's some outliers who can do that. Obviously, when it's a non-digital landscape that people were involved in, their routes to continuing to affirm is quite simple. They pick up the Times, say for example in the UK, and reaffirm that way, and they have a social group that's the same. Social media, in my view, does offer an enterprise where people can come together as a grouping, and yes, they can form familiar tribes online and they can self-reaffirm, as you mentioned. But does it also mean that there's ways of subverting it, do you feel, as well? Because so in terms of getting into that dialogue in a different manner that we used to face.
I think that's a great comment. We now have the data, both soft and hard, primary and secondary, big and small, in terms of psychological profiling, behavioral trends, that you can identify how people tend to live their lives and who influences them. I think that's a very astute observation and has to be factored into what we do. Because I think what you're doing, since I'm looking for reaffirmation too, is that the people in this room have the tools in their hands to be able to do this. The second thing I will say is that there really is a science behind the notion of transformation. Transformation. And it is a fascinating science. It would take half a day to really dig into it. But there are patterns, because there isn't just a switch, typically, where somebody changes their mind. There's typically a buildup, and the buildup is different depending on the type of issue, in the environment, in the individual. But I do encourage all of us to dig into that a little bit, because it will impact us in terms of our commercial success with our clients, but also in our understanding on how people actually change their minds. So good point.
Yeah, I do think, though, without a whole lot of science behind it, we're all experts in this room of observing the media. And I would observe this. 15 years ago, the media was a destination. We sought it out. It brought a lot of different stories to us. You went through a newspaper, you saw stuff you didn't necessarily seek out. You watched the evening news, you saw stuff you didn't necessarily seek out. Now, you've got the fragmentation of television journalism through cable channels. You know, there are people who only watch conservative cable and only watch liberal cable, and you've got the personalization of news feeds coming to you in which you only want to see your slice of the pie, and you're not actually kind of forced to see a broader range of perspective. And it does show in all the opinion polling, the left can't understand why the right thinks the way it does. And part of it is they didn't both see the same content.
My question was, you and Brad have painted quite a, well, depending on your perspective, a pretty grim picture of the world in some ways. And as you started off by Rob saying, is, you know, we're at a time where the world could be in a better place. You've highlighted some issues that our skills would help if we could apply them. And this is a really practical question, but where do you go from here? You have a conversation like this here today, and we all go off to a €200 head dinner, you know, which is very nice. But what do you do practically as an industry? We've got trade bodies, we've got global trade bodies, we've got local ones. You know, where do you start? Because these are big intractable issues you've highlighted.
Yeah, well, I think involvement in these issues at the NGO level is important. We're very involved with UNICEF. David Rockland mentioned it earlier. The UN World Food Program, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, the World Health Organization, and the World Economic Forum. And half of all that I've just mentioned is pro bono, and half is paid. And I think making our people available for that kind of thing, frequently on a paid business, so it can help your business, it doesn't have to just be for free, is a way for us to make our services available. As it turns out, I think I was trying to say this, our skills are very rare in the business and public sector world. I frankly didn't think so. You know, we all have a bit of an inferiority complex in our business. What's so special about this? Guess what? People don't do what we do. They don't synthesize. They don't tell stories the way we do. They don't get the IQ and the EQ, the emotional impact, and they don't build bridges for a living, and we do. So I would say start by getting involved in the issues and the organizations. And of course, any one of you doing healthcare work or urban design work, you know, have natural entree to it already.
And if I could come back to a point Brad made and that I think Colin was making about us as the brokers of dialogue, the world expects, and you mentioned this, 50 of the top GDPs are businesses. The world expects business to find a way to intersect business objectives with social needs. We can be very influential in that. There's a term of art, at least in English, called shared value. Michael Porter of Harvard started this. And there are some companies doing this very, very, very well. And to take that to an extreme, I'm going to talk about GE just for a minute. They're not a client of ours. But GE is doing a fabulous job in China growing its business, in spite of all this turmoil that we heard about. Starting in 2007, they made a concerted effort to align their business strategies with, I think at that time, the 12th or the 11th 5-year plan of China. I think we're into the 13th at the moment. But there is no business strategy that GE pursues in China without direct engagement with the government to align what they want to do business-wise with the needs of the country. And if there was ever a country that needed that kind of alignment, and if there was ever a country that was trying to avoid social upheaval, as you said, Rob, it is that country. And I think we could learn a lot of lessons. The second one that a company I want to point out is a client, and I think a client of a number of people, but Tata Group. We work for TCS, Tata Consulting Services, and not all of the company is listed, but the part of the company that is listed, 2/3 of their stock is held by 11 foundations controlled by the family. And each of those foundations addresses a societal need. So when the company does well, society does well. Now that is a very radical, let's just say it's an enthusiastic move to the social value of shared value perspective. And I think, as you said, you either have to get ready for this or it will be brought to your doorstep. I think this is where we can make the impact, Richard, on our own clients, if not have our own individual impact in our personal lives.
All right. My name is Tatiana. I'm from Azerbaijan, and you just touched the point of the education, which is like, one of the highest priority topics, and the PPP. Just wanted to bring you an example. It's strange indeed how we communicators are in the middle of the two different probably organizations, and one is the government sector. For instance, we've got the client, which is the Ministry of Education. We've got the private sector. Okay, the private sector is never happy with what the education minister is doing, because they say that you're not supplying enough of the skill power, the people whom we are getting are not qualified enough, etc., etc., etc. The Ministry of Education is saying that you're not hiring properly people. You're not saying us whom you need. But they never come together to speak. Okay, so just recently we launched 2 projects. First one was with the American Chamber of Commerce, when we did the fair trade. So we did a huge exhibition. We brought up a lot of the students, and we actually provided them with the opportunity to find a job through the corporations there, plus brought the Ministry of Education there, okay? So for them to understand what the market needs right now, okay? And the second one was, we actually went further. We knew that the private sector, again, is not happy with the government one, and vice versa. So there is a huge gap in the technical education. I don't know, Michael, you could help me. How it's called, the ПТУ, профессионально-техническое образование. It's a technical education, actually. It's not a higher education, it's after the school. So we are missing lots of the mechanics, we're missing lots of the plumbers, etc., etc., etc. And that's became less of the prestige, of course, for the guys to work in.
Yeah.
So what we did, we set up the project, the professional school, and that's the PPP actually between the education, the government, the Ministry of Education, and several private companies. So they've got a huge school right now launched where the people are getting through the training and then being employed with those corporations, obviously, highly paid, etc., etc. And basically, our task was even to promote it. So we went with a huge campaign, 360, through the country. So, if you know that you could be skilled enough, get enrolled into the school, and you can get a proper job.
Yeah, I love that. And another example, which is a client of ours, IBM, is doing that with a high school called P-Tech, because there aren't enough people, particularly people of color, of minority ethnic background, going into science, technology, engineering, and math. So they set up a program in which at the end of high school, you're hired by IBM. Half go on to graduate school, half are hired straight into the company because they are learning a technical craft. So it's not just high school kids going straight into professional sports, they're going right into a company like IBM. There are models in which it can work to the benefit of the company and to the benefit of the public sector. Thank you, Tatiana.
Thank you very much indeed to Dave and Rob for sharing that. It's not often that you are challenged head-on to do something to change the world. And I think it's nice to think about that because, frankly, this industry can sometimes feel slightly flaky. I think that's good, the fact. And, so I'm looking forward to following up on that. In fact, that's something I may well be pushing the ICCO board to see what we can do about that because it's something we should definitely grab an opportunity. So thank you very much indeed for sharing that with us. So please do show your appreciation to just leaves me to round off this afternoon's session with a gallop through. We have covered, I would think, one of the broadest range of topics I've seen in a session like this in my time in the trade association world. We've pretty much had something for everyone. We've done risk and innovation, what PR needs to thrive and survive in the future, evaluation, management and training of millennials and people in general, the global socio-political and economic trends, and we finish with a discussion on how we can make the world a better place. That's a pretty good run through, so I'd be stunned if everybody in the room hasn't got something they can take out and use in their daily work life, and if not their home life. So thank you very much. Well done for sticking out to the end. I know it's been a packed agenda, and we've got another packed one tomorrow. For those of you who are attending the gala dinner, it's at the Palazzo Dorini in Via Santa Maria Valle. I'm told that's a 10-minute taxi ride from this hotel. I don't know how long it is for the hotels people aren't staying here, but it's in the centre. It's very well known. The festivities kick off at 7:15 with the launch of Global Women in PR, and the gala dinner is at 8:15. Those of you attending, the dress code is smart casual. I've already been told I can't wear my jeans. And I believe there's going to be a cook-off from 2 Michelin-starred chefs. I'm not sure what a cook-off is, but I'm looking forward to seeing it. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.